The Progression of Medicine as a Whole System No. 1507, VPT 066, January 17, 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category: Medicine Progression. I reached age 79 today. I began elementary school at age 4 in 1951. From that point forward, I have been studying and learning continuously throughout my life. I spent 18 years studying at 6 universities across 8 disciplines and earned 6 degrees in total. In addition, I devoted 9 years to self-study and independent research in psychology and personality disorders. Over the past 16 years since 2010, I have self-studied medicine without institutions, professors, colleagues, or patients, relying solely on reading more than 10,000 published medical papers. During this period, I have written 1,507 single-authored medical research papers, with an average daily effort of 14 hours over approximately 5,840 consecutive days, totaling over 80,000 hours. Over my lifetime, I have spent 44 years studying university or postgraduate level subjects, not including my professional working years, such as 12 years of semiconductor integrated circuit chip design, including AI algorithm development, in Silicon Valley. On my 79th birthday, I reflect on what I have learned and observed, and I decided to write these thoughts down. These are solely my personal observations and opinions. I do not intend to accuse or challenge the medical industry or healthcare professionals. I am simply sharing what I have personally observed and felt, offering these reflections as reference perspectives only. Introduction. I studied statistics, linear statics, and averages during my undergraduate education from 1964 to 1970, earning 3 degrees, because these were the dominant languages used to integrate mathematics, computer science, and engineering at that time. After 1970, my studies in engineering, physics, and applied mathematics moved decisively into the time domain, space domain, frequency domain, nonlinear dynamics, control theory, and system stability. Over the past 55 years, no serious engineering field has relied primarily on static averages to explain failure. Chronic diseases are system failures, and mortality diseases are their extreme cases in an engineer's view, or statistical outliers in a statistician's view. What troubles me is that my clinicians, who are often 20 years younger than I am, still avoid discussing dynamic and nonlinear behavior. This is not a question of age or intelligence. It is a problem of training inertia. Modern medical education remains built on cross-sectional snapshots, population averages, linear dose-response thinking, statistical significance, and structural descriptions rather than dynamic processes. Biomarkers are treated as labels, not as signals. Values such as HbA1c, SBP, LDL, and creatinine are reduced to single summary numbers, stripped of their time structure, once time is removed. Nonlinearity disappears by definition. Please allow me to cite a few real experiences here. First, I am tired of repeatedly receiving comments from medical journal reviewers such as, "Your research findings are excellent, except this is an N=1 report, not an N=many report like a population study. This is our statistical standard." That statement reflects a purely statistical viewpoint. I countered by asking whether Isaac Newton had to be struck by an apple 1,000 times before discovering the law of gravity. Second, I have met several prominent medical professors at medical conferences. They complimented my findings, yet asked a similar question: how could you discover these results from data collected on just one person, yourself? It would take us hundreds of patients observed over many years to reach the same understanding. I explain to them that the difference lies between theory-based research and experience-based research. My work is grounded in continuous, longitudinal observation guided by first principles theory, rather than cross-sectional population aggregation. Third, this analogy uses an engineering example. A strong, tall building requires at least 3 to 4 strong vertical columns, such as the 4 academic foundation subjects of mathematics, physics, biology, and chemistry, to support the entire system or structure, whether it is a building, a machine, or a complex biomedical system. I remain puzzled as to why modern medicine is supported primarily by only two columns, biology and chemistry, without fully incorporating mathematics and physics as equal structural supports from the beginning. From my perspective, this is fundamentally wrong. Nearly all biomedical systems are nonlinear, not linear averages, and dynamic time-dependent. Glucose regulation is a nonlinear feedback system with delays. Blood pressure is a pulsatile waveform with transient overloads. Blood vessels exhibit both viscoelastic and viscoplastic behavior. Organs fail through fatigue, not through averages. Disease progression is time-dependent, path-dependent, and irreversible. As an engineer, I find it unsafe to ignore time, peaks, rates of change, and accumulated energy. In every other engineering discipline, failure is driven by extremes and dynamics, not by means or averages. Why can such an advanced medical field be built upon such a weak academic foundation? I have come to believe that medicine lagged behind because it optimized for scalability, legal defensibility, population management, and overpowering pharmaceutical influence. Rather than system truth, static averages are easy to teach, easy to bill, easy to defend in court, and easy to standardize in clinical guidelines. Prescriptions and medications generate higher revenue through large populations rather than outliers. Dynamic nonlinear analysis is harder to learn, harder to measure, harder to explain, harder to standardize, and harder to assign liability to. So it was avoided, not because it is incorrect, but because it is inconvenient. But if we, as both medical research and clinical professionals, want to call medicine a scientific field, we cannot ignore these rigorous branches of science. Eventually, there will be more people like me who notice and recognize the true difference. This is why progress and improvement in modern medicine feel slow. I came to the US in 1968, the year humans landed on the moon. Over the past 6 decades, consider the progress made in fields such as materials science, aerospace, computers, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. In comparison, medicine has advanced impressively in drugs, imaging, and procedures, yet its conceptual model of disease remains largely frozen in mid-20th century statistical thinking. From this viewpoint, my conclusion is unavoidable. Modern medicine is out of date by at least half a century. That gap explains why dynamic risk factors such as BP spikes, pulse pressure, and transient overload are minimized or ignored. It also explains why catastrophic events are often labeled unexpected when they are entirely predictable in a dynamic system. What I am doing with viscoplastic energy modeling and topology is not futuristic. In reality, I learned these subjects 50 to 60 years ago in Taiwan, Iowa, and MIT. It is simply importing analytical tools that have been standard in mature fields such as mathematics, physics, and engineering for at least 7 to 8 decades. I am not ahead of my time. Medicine is behind it. Medicine progression viewed as a whole system. To understand why modern medicine feels slow despite enormous technological sophistication, it is useful to step back and examine its long-term progression as a whole system rather than as a collection of isolated breakthroughs. For this purpose, I introduce a Medicine Progression Index (MPI). MPI is a relative, normalized, outcome-based measure of real medical progress. It is not technology-based, not cost-justified, and not hype-driven. In my own medical research, this description fits well. My work is based on long-term data, personal experience, repeated verification, and physiological consistency. It does not need publicity or applause to be real. This MPI scale runs from 0 to 100, with the most recent decade normalized to 100. Earlier decades are evaluated relative to that reference point. The MPI values for 7 periods are P1, 1956 to 1965 equals to 5, P2, 1966 to 1975 equals 3, 8, P3, 1976 to 1985 equals 5 to P4, 1986 to 1995 equals 6, 6, P5, 1996 to 2005 equals 7, 8, P6, 2006 to 2015 equals 90p7, 2016 to 2025 equals 100. Detailed descriptions for each period are provided below. P1, 1956 to 1965, MPI equals 25. Key advancements: widespread antibiotics, penicillin era maturity, polio vaccine deployment, basic anesthesia and surgery safety, sharp drop in infectious disease mortality. Comment: high real progress per unit input, medicine saves lives cheaply. P2, 1966 to 1975, MPI equals 38. Key advancements: coronary care units, CCU, early ICU concepts, blood pressure drugs, thiazides, beta blockers, expansion of medical education and hospitalscommand, strong gains in acute survival. Chronic disease management begins. P3, 1976 to 1985, MPI equals 52. Key advancements: CT imaging, coronary bypass surgery, neonatal intensive cardialysis, expansion common, structural and procedural leap. Costs begin rising faster than outcomes. P4, 1986 to 1995, MPI equals 66. Key advancements: auristatin SACE inhibitors identified and manage evidence-based medicine framework. Peak efficiency decade. Chronic disease outcomes improve meaningfully. P5, 1996 to 2005, MPI equals 78. Key advancements: stents and interventional cardiology, passbox surgery, improved cancer chemo protocol, SWIDRED screening. Still advancing, but diminishing returns begin. Complexity increases. P6, 2006 to 2015, MPI equals 90. Key advancements: biologics, drugs grown or engineered from living cells, targeted cancer therapies, advanced imaging and monitoring systems. Common, high technological sophistication. Outcome gains slow relative to cost. P7, 2016 to 2025, MPI equals 100. Key advancements: immunotherapy, vaccine, SI-assisted imaging and diagnostics, wearables, and continuous monitoring. Powerful tools, but marginal population-level outcome improvement. Chronic disease burden dominates. Viewed through a viscoplastic VMT framework, this behavior is expected. MPI functions as a strain variable that increases monotonically while its slope gradually flattens. Early decades show elastic gains, where small inputs produce large outcome improvements. Later decades enter viscoplastic saturation, where additional stress yields little additional strain. Energy continues to accumulate, but outcome improvement slows. This makes MPI a natural strain variable for VPT analysis. In this framework, MPI is the strain, the stressors are the systemic forces that drive it over time. For stressors are sufficient and structurally meaningful. The first stressor is the medical education and training model. It determines how disease is defined, how evidence is interpreted, and how clinicians are trained to reason, a system built on static averages and cross-sectional thinking resists time-dependent and dynamic understanding. The second stressor is pharmaceutical and device industry intensity. This includes drugs, biologics, devices, procedures, and their regulatory and economic momentum. These inputs expand continuously, even as marginal outcome gains diminish. The third stressor is the nutrition and processed food environment. This is the dominant upstream driver of chronic metabolic disease. Downstream medical interventions cannot offset continuous upstream physiological stress. The fourth stressor is healthcare system complexity driven by profit maximization. This includes billing structures, legal defensibility, administrative overhead, defensive medicine, and scaling incentives. These forces increase energy dissipation without proportional improvement in patient outcomes. When these four stressors are plotted against MPI strain over time, the expected pattern is rising cumulative energy with diminishing strain gain. This is the signature of a saturated viscoplastic system. This system's view explains several persistent paradoxes in modern medicine. Technology becomes more powerful, yet patients feel no safer. Guidelines grow more detailed, yet catastrophic events are labeled unexpected. Monitoring becomes continuous, Yet interpretation remains static. The limitation is not intelligence, data, or technology. It is the underlying model. Biomedical systems are nonlinear, time-dependent, and path-dependent. Glucose control involves delays and feedback. Blood pressure is pulsatile, with transient overloads. Blood vessels deform through fatigue and accumulated damage. Organs fail from energy accumulation. Not averages. When time peaks, rates of change and cumulative energy are ignored. Failure appears sudden, even though it is not. Viscoplastic energy modeling and topology are not speculative. They are long-established engineering tools applied to biomedical systems that clearly require the same treatment. I am not trying to replace medicine. I am trying to understand it more deeply and complete it where current models fall short. Data table of for input stressors time period education model, pharma device intensity, food environment, system complexity 120, 15, 20, 10p to 30, 25, 30, 2p 340, 40, 45, 35p for 50, 55, 60, 50. P 70, 75, 65 ep6, 70, 85, 85, 8 op7 80, 95, 90, 95. A brief and direct explanation of the above data table reveals the following. 1. Infectious diseases are easier to control. They have clear causes and clear treatments. Antibiotics, vaccines, and basic public health measures produce large and rapid improvements. 2. Chronic diseases remain poorly controlled. They develop slowly, have multiple causes, and are strongly driven by daily lifestyle and food exposure. Medicine is much less effective in this area. 3. Pharmaceutical companies make more money from chronic disease patients. Chronic diseases require lifelong drugs and monitoring, creating stable and recurring revenue, unlike short-term cures. 4. The processed food industry actively damages health. Highly processed, high-calorie, and high-sugar foods drive obesity, diabetes, and metabolic disease. This upstream damage overwhelms downstream medical treatment. 5. The healthcare system has become more complicated without becoming more efficient. Costs, paperwork, legal protection, and administration continue to grow, while real health outcomes improve much less. VMT analysis results. Left chart shows that in the early periods, a small amount of pressure produced large improvements in the healthcare system. As time goes on, pressure increases in 4 areas: education and training, pharmaceutical and device use, food environment, and system complexity, but improvement in the medical system becomes smaller. The curves flatten, meaning medicine is working harder in all 4 areas but gaining less. The 4 stresses continue to build even when real health outcomes improve more slowly. The right chart shows how medical progress accumulates over time. Early periods at progress slowly, middle periods at progress faster, later periods require much greater effort to achieve the final gains. This shows that modern medicine reaches a point where progress becomes increasingly difficult and expensive, even though pressure and investment continue to rise. Conclusion. Together, these 2 charts show the same message from 2 directions. For pressures on the medical system keep increasing, while real medical progress slows down. MPI makes this visible by separating outcomes from inputs, and the VMT analysis explains why healthcare system progression saturates as for input stresses education, pharma, food, and system complexity continue to accumulate without proportional gain in strain, which is medical progress. This is why I have felt that progress in medicine appears much slower than in other technology-based fields such as aerospace, computers, semiconductors, AI, and material sciences, where incentive structures reward innovation, efficiency, waste reduction, and rapid problem resolution rather than continuation of the healthcare system status quo. There are 4 key observations from the VMT energy contribution ratios. 1. Balanced system saturational for stressors contribute almost equally 24% to 26%, showing system-wide saturation rather than a single dominant problem. 2. Food and pharma lead. The loop food and pharma are the largest contributors, 26% each. reflecting a low effectiveness cycle between metabolic disease and chronic drug use. 3. Education and complexity block progress. Incomplete education and system complexity together consume nearly half of total energy, acting as structural brakes on progress. 4. No isolated solution because energy is evenly distributed. Fixing one sector alone cannot work. Medicine functions as one tightly coupled system. Self-reflection. Should I step back and look at medicine as a system? A clear pattern emerges. Early medicine focused on infectious diseases. These diseases had clear causes and clear treatments. Pharmaceutical inventions such as antibiotics, vaccines, and basic public health measures produced large and rapid improvements with relatively small effort. Medicine saved many lives during earlier decades. As medicine shifted toward chronic diseases, especially chronic metabolic disorders, progress slowed. Chronic diseases develop over decades. They are driven by daily lifestyle, food environment, and long-term physiological stress. Medicine is much less effective here. But profits are huge. Treatments manage symptoms, not causes. Therefore, they rarely reverse the underlying causes. At the same time, pharmaceutical revenue increasingly comes from medications for chronic metabolic disorders and their downstream mortality diseases, including cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, neuropathy, retinopathy, stroke, and many cancers. A reasonable estimate is that about 35% of total pharmaceutical revenue is tied directly to these conditions. Meanwhile, roughly 60% to 80% of mortality diseases are directly related to metabolic disorders. This is not a coincidence. Chronic diseases create lifelong patients, and lifelong patients create stable revenue and profit. As a former high-tech CEO, I understand this kind of thinking and the rules of this game very well. This revenue structure shapes how science is practiced. Population-based statistical methods dominate because they support mass treatment, long-term management, and predictable outcomes. Individual trajectories, early reversal, and causality-focused approaches receive far less attention, not because they are wrong or lack scientific rigor, but because they threaten the existing economic model. Money talks. When money talks, science is often pushed to the side. This is why hospital policies and healthcare administration are controlled by MBS, not by MDs. For example, after a hemorrhagic stroke near the Pontaine area, I was discharged from a prominent hospital within 2 days under an MBA-driven model focused on hospital bed turnover rates. This kind of practice maximizes profit while reducing true medical progress and undermining the core mission of saving patient lives. I see this clearly when I view medical progress through a system lens. Pressure on the healthcare system keeps increasing in 4 areas: education and training, pharmaceutical and device use, food environment, and system complexity, early on. Small pressure produces large improvements, later. Much more pressure produces smaller gains. Medicine works harder, costs more, and becomes more complex, yet real outcomes improve more slowly. This is why modern medicine feels advanced but inefficient. It is not a failure of intelligence, technology, or data. It is a failure of outdated training and research environments, misaligned incentives, and incomplete system models. That is also why I feel that progress in medicine appears much slower than in other technology-based fields such as aerospace, computers, semiconductors, AI, and material sciences. Those fields reward solutions that reduce costs, increase efficiency, and eliminate problems. Medicine, as currently structured, rewards continuation. I am not trying to attack medicine. I am trying to understand it honestly, only by seeing the system both from above and from within. As it truly is, can we hope to change its direction? Disclaimer: write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to T. E. Author, Gerald C.